my parents found my pay stub and demanded I give them $3,000 every month. When I refused, they showed up at my workplace, called my boss with fake accusations, and broke into my apartment. They thought they could control me forever. They were wrong. I didn't just cut them off. I made sure they lost everything. And when they came begging on their knees, I slammed the door in their faces. If you've ever dealt with toxic parents who thought they owned you just because they raised you, this story is going to feel like pure justice. Stick around, because what starts as financial manipulation turns into the most satisfying takedown you'll ever hear. And if you love seeing entitled people get exactly what they deserve, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Mary for more real stories where karma hits hard. My name is Lydia. I'm 26 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, my parents would finally see me as more than just a paycheck. I was wrong. Growing up in a small Missouri town, I learned early that my parents, Janet and Brian, didn't believe in working regular jobs. My mother always had an excuse. Her back hurt too much to work, she'd say, even though she had no problem dancing at every neighborhood barbecue. My father claimed every boss he'd ever had disrespected him. According to him, the world was always wrong, and he was always the victim. Meanwhile, I became the one who cooked, cleaned, and kept the house running. I didn't get to be a kid. I grew up fast because I had no choice. By the time I was 10, I was making my own meals and walking myself to school. By 12, I was calling utility companies to negotiate payment plans because my parents couldn't be bothered. When our power got shut off one winter, my father blamed me for not paying attention, even though I was just a child. I didn't cry. I just wrapped myself in blankets and survived. My parents raised me in guilt. Every time I asked why we couldn't afford groceries, my mother would sigh dramatically and say, "If you loved us, you'd help us more, Lydia." I was 8 years old the first time she said that. 8 years old, and already made to feel responsible for 2 grown adults. By the time I reached high school, I'd taken on more responsibility than most adults. I worked part-time jobs to help pay bills. I studied hard and earned scholarships so I could go to college. I did everything right, thinking that one day they'd be proud of me. When I finally landed a great job as a software analyst after college, making good money for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe things could finally get better. Maybe we could become a real family. I was so incredibly wrong. One evening, my parents showed up at my apartment without calling first. I smiled anyway, trying to convince myself this was going to be a nice visit. My mother, Janet, walked around like she owned the place, checking my countertops, peeking into my fridge. My father, Brian, sat on the couch, tapping his foot impatiently like he was waiting for a business meeting to start. Then my mother said, "So, we heard you're making good money now." They hadn't even said hello. Before I could respond, my father leaned forward. "It's time you start helping us out. Family owes family, Lydia. You wouldn't have gotten where you are without us." Something inside me cracked. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't ask if I was happy. They didn't congratulate me on my success. They only cared about what my bank account could do for them. My mother crossed her arms. "We need you to cover our mortgage, utilities, and give us extra each month. You're making plenty." Plenty. As if it had fallen from the sky. As if I hadn't fought for every single dollar. That night was the beginning. The moment I realized I had never been their daughter. I had always been their backup plan, their safety net, their retirement fund. A few weeks later, I made the mistake of stopping by their house for dinner. I was running late that morning and had shoved my latest pay stub into my purse without thinking. During dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. When I came back, the atmosphere had changed completely. My purse was zipped slightly differently. My mother was holding my pay stub like it was a winning lottery ticket. So, Janet said, tapping the paper with a stiff finger, "This is what you've been hiding from us." My heart kicked hard. Why were you going through my purse? Brian leaned back, arms crossed. "Don't change the subject. You make this much, and you let us struggle after everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me?" I stared at them. What exactly? Janet slammed her hand on the table, making the plates rattle. "Don't you dare disrespect us. You owe us back pay for being born." I blinked, unable to process the words. Back pay for being born. Brian pulled the paper closer. "We've decided it's fair for you to give us $3,000 a month. You can afford it. It's time you start paying us what we deserve." $3,000. That was more than half my take-home pay after taxes. "That's insane," I said slowly. "I have my own bills, my own life. You owe us." Janet shouted, her face twisting with fury. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you." Something inside me snapped. "You didn't raise me. I raised myself." The room went silent for a moment. Then Janet's fury exploded. She slammed the table again, harder this time. "You ungrateful child. You think you're better than us now." I stood up slowly, my hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the realization settling deep into my bones. This wasn't love. This was entitlement wrapped in manipulation. I walked out that night, knowing everything had changed. A week later, I was at work finishing a project when I heard raised voices near the reception area. Then I heard my name. "Lydia, we know you're in here." My stomach dropped. I stood up slowly, hoping I was wrong. But when I stepped into the hallway, there they were, Janet and Brian, standing in the middle of the office lobby like they owned the place, drawing the attention of every coworker nearby. Janet pointed at me the moment she saw me. There she is, the daughter who can't even help her own parents. "What are you doing here?" I whispered, mortified. "You need to leave." Brian waved a folder in the air. "We need you to sign papers to add us to your bank account. We're done waiting." Several coworkers stopped what they were doing, pretending not to stare while clearly staring. Before I could respond, my manager Dylan approached. He was calm but firm. "Hello, I'm Dylan Torres, and you must be Lydia's family?" Brian grinned, thinking he'd found an ally. "Yes, and we need a moment with her." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Dylan said politely but firmly. "You cannot disrupt our workplace. I'll have to ask you to leave immediately." Janet's expression twisted. "Are you defending her? She's abandoning her parents." Dylan didn't flinch. "This is a professional environment. You're welcome to contact Lydia outside of work, but you cannot be here. We have security. That shut them up." Dylan gestured toward the door, and they left, but not before shooting me looks of pure hatred. Once they were gone, Dylan pulled me aside into his office. "Lydia, this isn't normal. You need boundaries. Strong ones." I nodded, too embarrassed to speak. "If they come back, let me know immediately," he said gently. When I left the office, my phone was flooded. 5 voicemails, 10 text messages, all from my parents. "You're heartless. You're turning strangers against your own family. We will tell everyone what kind of daughter you are." I stood in the hallway listening to the venom pour through the speaker. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just felt tired. Tired enough to start planning my way out. But before I could do anything, things got worse. A few days later, I was called into HR. The director, Megan Walsh, looked serious. "Lydia," she said gently, "we received some concerning calls this morning. 2 individuals identifying themselves as your parents contacted us multiple times. They claimed you've been committing tax fraud and reporting false income." The world tilted. What? That's not true. That's not even possible. They were very persistent. Megan continued. They said they were trying to protect the company from a criminal. I felt my throat tightening. My own parents were trying to get me fired. I swear I didn't do anything wrong. I said, my voice cracking. They're lying. They're trying to control me. Megan softened. Lydia, we're not accusing you. We just need to understand what's happening. I explained everything. The demands for money, the scene at my workplace, the harassment. By the time I finished, Megan's expression had hardened, not at me, but at the situation. We're putting a blocking order on their numbers, she said. They won't be able to contact the company again. If they show up here, security will remove them immediately. Relief and heartbreak washed over me. HR was protecting me, but the fact that I needed protection from my own parents cut deeper than anything. That evening, I came home expecting quiet. Instead, I found my apartment had been broken into. My desk drawers were open. Papers were scattered everywhere. My personal documents, tax forms, bank statements, employment contracts were spread across the floor in messy piles. But nothing else was touched. My laptop was still there. My TV was still mounted. My jewelry box was closed. This wasn't a robbery. Someone was looking for information. I immediately called my landlord, Walter Kim. He pulled up the security footage, and my worst fear was confirmed. There they were, my mother and father standing outside my door. Brian pulled out a key, an old spare I'd given them years ago and forgotten about. They'd made a copy without telling me. They unlocked my door, stepped inside, and went through my entire life like it belonged to them. I called the police. When the officers arrived, they took notes and watched the footage. But their answer crushed me. Since nothing was stolen, and they technically had a key, it's tricky. We don't have enough evidence of criminal intent. So they can just break in and go through my documents? I asked, my voice shaking. And nothing happens. The officers shifted uncomfortably. We understand how upsetting this is. But legally, our hands are tied unless we have stronger proof. When they left, I sat on my bed, the silence crushing me. My parents didn't just want money. They wanted total control. That's when I decided, if I didn't fight back now, they'd destroy everything I'd built. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer named Stella Hartman. I told her everything, the demands, the workplace harassment, the HR incident, the break-in. I showed her text messages, voicemails, photos of my ransacked apartment, and the security footage. Stella listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she said, Lydia, this is harassment, and it's escalating. We need to protect you. Together, we filed for a restraining order. We also filed a trespassing complaint and drafted a cease and desist letter addressing the harassment directed at my employer. But I didn't stop there. Stella helped me do something else. Something I knew would hurt them where it mattered most. I reached out to every person my parents had borrowed money from over the years. And there were many. My parents had a long history of borrowing from neighbors, friends, and family members with promises to pay them back. They never did. I contacted my Aunt Julie, my father's sister, who'd lent them $5,000 3 years ago. I reached out to their former neighbor Terry, who'd paid their electric bill multiple times. I called Logan, my father's old friend who'd co-signed a loan my parents defaulted on. One by one, I told them the truth. I explained that my parents had been demanding thousands from me while still owing money to everyone else. I provided documentation. I showed them the threats, the break-in, the lies to my employer. The response was immediate. People were furious. Not at me, at my parents. Aunt Julie called my parents directly and demanded her money back. Terry posted on the neighborhood Facebook group about how Janet and Brian had manipulated people for years. Logan, whose credit had been destroyed by my parents' default, contacted a lawyer about pursuing legal action. Within 2 weeks, my parents' reputation in their small town completely collapsed. People who had tolerated their excuses for years suddenly saw the pattern clearly. The invitations stopped. The favors dried up. The friends disappeared. Meanwhile, without my financial support they'd been counting on, my parents couldn't keep up with their bills. The mortgage they demanded I pay, it went into default. The utilities? Shut off. The car payments? Repossessed. Everything fell apart. Then came the court hearing for the restraining order. I sat calmly while my parents put on a dramatic performance. Janet clutched her chest and cried. Brian shook his head like a wounded father. But I had evidence, security footage, voicemails, HR reports, text messages. The judge reviewed everything, then looked at my parents with a hard expression. Your behavior is unacceptable and alarming. I am issuing a permanent restraining order. Janet wailed. Brian cursed under his breath. But I didn't react. I simply breathed. 3 months later, I heard through Aunt Julie that my parents had lost their house. They'd moved into a small rental apartment in a rough part of town. Janet had finally gotten a job at a grocery store. Brian was working at a gas station. They were surviving barely, and they were miserable. Then, one evening, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and froze. It was my mother. She looked older, tired, broken. Her clothes were worn. Her face was pale. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Lydia, she said, her voice shaking. Please, we need help. We lost everything. We're barely surviving. I'm begging you. I stared at her for a long moment. This was the woman who demanded $3,000 a month. The woman who tried to get me fired. The woman who'd broken into my home. You had a daughter who would have helped you. I said quietly, but you didn't want a daughter. You wanted a paycheck. Now you have neither. Tears rolled down her face. Please, Lydia, we're your parents. No, I said, parents protect their children. You only ever protected yourselves. I closed the door. She knocked again, begging, crying. I didn't open it. Eventually, she left. 6 months later, I got a promotion at work. A big one. I moved into a beautiful apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. I started dating someone kind and supportive. I took a vacation to Europe, something I'd always dreamed of. My life became everything I'd worked for. Meanwhile, my parents stayed stuck in their small apartment, stuck in their low-wage jobs, stuck in the consequences of their own choices. And I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. Because I finally understood something important. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty. It's survival. And sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's simply living well while those who tried to destroy you watch from the outside. It's been 2 years since I closed that door on my mother. 2 years since I chose myself over the guilt they'd programmed into me since childhood. My life now, it's peaceful. It's mine. I wake up every morning without dread. I go to work without fear of my parents showing up. I come home to an apartment that feels safe. I don't know exactly how my parents are doing now, and honestly, I don't need to know. I heard through distant relatives that they're still working their jobs, still living in that small apartment, still blaming me for their situation instead of looking in the mirror. And you know what? That's not my problem anymore. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have just walked away quietly instead of exposing them to everyone they knew. But here's the thing, they didn't just hurt me. They hurt dozens of people over the years. People deserve to know the truth. I didn't destroy my parents. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped being the person who cleaned up their mess. Today, I'm thriving. I have a career I love, relationships that are healthy and supportive, and a future that's entirely my own. My parents taught me one valuable lesson, though they never intended to. You don't owe anyone your peace, not even family, especially not family who only sees you as a resource to exploit. So, to anyone out there dealing with toxic parents, manipulative family members, or people who think they own you just because of shared DNA, remember this: protecting yourself isn't betrayal. Walking away isn't cruelty. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the door and build a life they can't touch. And that's exactly what I did. All right, revenge with Mary Fam. Let's talk about what Lydia just pulled off. Her parents spent her entire childhood using her. They made her responsible for bills when she was 8 years old. They guilt-tripped her, manipulated her, and when she finally became successful, they demanded $3,000 a month. When she said no, they tried to destroy her. They showed up at her workplace. They lied to HR claiming she was committing fraud. They broke into her apartment and went through her personal documents. They thought they could control her forever. They thought she'd break. Instead, Lydia did something brilliant. She didn't just protect herself with a restraining order. She exposed them to everyone they'd ever manipulated. She contacted every person they owed money to and told the truth. She cut off their financial lifeline and watched their entire world collapse. And when they lost everything, their house, their reputation, their comfortable life, and came crawling back begging for help, she said no. That's not cruelty. That's the consequences. That's what happens when you treat people like ATM machines instead of human beings. Lydia didn't just escape. She made sure they understood exactly what they'd lost. And she thrived while they struggled with the life they built on manipulation. That's how you take back your power. What do you think? Did Lydia handle this the right way? Or should she have given her parents one more chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you loved seeing entitled parents get exactly what they deserved, smash that subscribe button, because Revenge with Mary has plenty more stories where justice is served ice cold. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.